And we are back, and this is my first segment of today, so I'm very excited to have my good friend John Ehlenfeldt with us. We're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, diversity and inclusion. And I know this is something that you have been focused on for a long time. Tell us a bit about your background in this, how you got involved. I know that you have been studying this. Tell us your background.
Sure, absolutely. Well, one, thank you for having me today. Pleasure to be here. Diversity and inclusion is definitely a passion of mine. I kind of got into it accidentally when attending WEC receptions for MPI, their global annual conference. I remember being handed a small piece of paper that talked about a special interest groups for LGBT attendees, and I went to it, and it was just a handful of people that met in...
Sounds very secretive.
It's secretive.
Here's a little
off
note.
to the side. Nobody really talked about it. It was very hush-hush. And then the following year, the individual that set that up actually retired from the industry, and people were saying, when's the event? When's the event? And I was like, I don't know. I just attended it. And then it seemed like through osmosis, I ended up inheriting that event. So I've been running it for 18 years with MPI, and I've been goal of pushing the needle through that, of growing it in attendance and sponsorship to where it is now. It's in the program and on the mobile app for MPI at WC.
It's big. Like, it is the go-to meetup. Like, everyone goes to this.
I appreciate
and
that.
Everyone goes, oh, are you going to the reception? Yeah, I'll see you there.
Yeah, so we had 400 people in Toronto
Yeah.
at the WC for MPI, and Paul Van Deventer, the president and CEO of MPI, was present, as well as upper leadership with MPI. So that's just been so much of a passion of mine. I decided to become more educated in that, and I enrolled in a program through Cornell University to be certified on their executive leadership program in diversity and inclusion. And I think some of my great takeaways were that diversity and inclusion is very similar to nailing Jell-O to a wall. And
I've never tried that, but I don't think it'd be very easy.
Exactly. And the reason that that's kind of a great way of summing it up is everybody seems to, it's a hot topic right now, and everybody seems to understand diversity and inclusion, but they focus only on the diversity part of it, which is
Right.
the demographics component of it. Your gender, your person of color, LGBTQ, introvert, extrovert, instead of looking at what inclusion is. And that's really the tough part to put a name to and to grasp. And but
So what do people think inclusion is?
they think inclusion is just that everybody is welcome, and it goes so much more beyond that. That is really more of a psychological safety aspect of it, much like when you work for a company, in your employee manual it says you won't be discriminated against based on all these different things: race, religion, color, sex, sexual orientation. But beyond that, it's when you bring your true, authentic self to all you do. And that's either with your involvement with your work, with an association. And when you are actually able to do that, the differences of the background and experiences that you've had because of the diversity that you have as an individual, whichever component you relate to, allows you to be a change agent for a group, association, or organization for the better. And there are really specific metrics around that companies that embrace that and are really doing a good job of bringing your true authentic self to the table are 25% more profitable. They have less turnover, and they really drive innovation, because the innovation comes from that myriad of background and experiences. And it isn't always just the typical ones of gender or ethnicity. It could come down to areas of introvert, extrovert. So in a team dynamic, an extrovert, let's say you're the extrovert, could be more vocal.
I am.
I thought nothing less. Could be more vocal about an opinion. And let's
Yeah.
say I'm the introvert, and you, in a team dynamic, express a solution to a particular task or project that we're going for. And I associate with about 90% of what you're saying and think, Alex is strategic, he has good insight. I'm going to go ahead in the team dynamic and vote for his idea. But as the introvert, maybe my idea was the one that was more 100% best for the group, but it was never heard because I'm an introvert. And so you put metrics in and ways to make sure that everyone does have have that inclusive voice at the table. You could vote on the project anonymously, where everybody writes it down and puts it in a bucket, and you pull it out and read those. Right. Or as a team leader, you could call on the introvert first and say, hey, John, share your opinions on what you think about on this project.
So in that instance, it's important to know who your team is and what your team is comprised of, because I think a lot of times when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, there is an element of people keeping certain things about themselves to themselves. So I love the idea of being your authentic self, because in that case, you're sharing, hey, I am an introvert, but here's some things that you can do to help me get my ideas across, right? And that takes time and it takes effort. And it's not just a warm and fuzzy, hey, everyone's welcome, right?
That's very true. And you also need to be able to put in some practices that make sure you get to that level of everyone having a voice and a seat at the table, because there are certain elements such as unconscious bias that can creep in, that are stereotypes that are not necessarily true, but over the years have become kind of the mainstay. So you have a man being really aggressive and forthright on his opinion is seen as a leader and being a strategist, where a woman, it could seem more as being nitpicky or difficult. Right. And that is not the case on those types of situations. And so you got to make sure you put the metrics in to get everybody a seat at the table. And some entities are doing a good job at that. The state of California, just in 2019 this year, has a new law where if you are either doing business in California or you're based in California, you have to have a minimum of one female on your board of directors. And by the time you get to 2022, you're going to have half of your board of directors be female. And that means if you don't, there are fines. They start at $300,000 and escalate from there. But the real metric behind that is now they have a seat at the table. So when discussions around equal pay for equal work come into play, they're there to give a voice for it. And that gender should not come into play on equal pay versus equal work. So now you have moved the needle and you have the metric of a seat at the table, and that's when your inclusivity begins.
So what work still needs to be done? I know there's so much, but obviously things are happening, right? With California and some other states are working on stuff like this. But it seems like there's still so much work to do. Like, what's a small step that someone in their organization can take to move that needle?
Sure. I think everybody needs to realize that they have a sphere of influence and that they can be an element of change. And it can start from the beginning in our industry. If you're a college graduate, you look at statistics show that college graduates, 66% of them, look at a company profile to see what kind of platform they have on diversity and inclusion. And that's an important aspect on who they're going to work for. But if you take it a step further, they don't need to wait for somebody to be an evangelist and be the poster child for it. They themselves can actually make that change. If you look at the United States having over 360,000 people in the workforce, and in the population, 18% is Hispanic and 14% is African American. Those two percentages combined, if they make the decision to not buy products from companies that don't have a well-vetted diversity and inclusion program or work for those entities, that's an element of change, because those companies will not be profitable, and either they will change and move forward with what the current times are as far as importance of D&I, or they'll be left behind. And so they become that individual element of change instead of waiting for a collective group to do it. And that's really what's going to move the needle, and that's where everybody can have a place and a voice.
So I'm going to ask a tough question.
Okay, I like tough questions.
Tough question. So, especially this year with LGBT Pride in June, there was a lot of talk about all these organizations just throwing a rainbow on their logo and calling it a day on social media, right? And there's this discussion, with Nike and Colin Kaepernick of pandering to certain minority groups. So I think there is a little bit of a fear of, well, if we try something, people are just going to think we're pandering. So what is the difference between authentic diversity and inclusion and just doing it for the ability to say we do it?
That's a really good question. So when you're just doing it for the ability of saying you're doing it, as you're mentioning, that's really more of marketing to, let's say, the LGBT community, since you brought that up as an example, the actual other metric to make sure that they walk the walk and talk the talk is to see what kind of program structure that the organization has in place. So they may hire people that are from a diverse background, which leads to that demographic check mark I mentioned earlier on diversity only. So many people of this gender, people of color, people LGBTQ, handicap. But does the organization, whether it's a corporation or an association, have components built in with it? Do they have meetups for people that identify with those particular groups? And do those meetups have their own purpose within the organization? And do they have a voice to the board of directors and the CEO of the organization? Are they able to put in components that affect the way the company operates and the way the company believes in its product? Does that mean not going into countries that maybe are having issues with human rights? That may be. Does that affect the profitability of the company? Yes, it does. But there are other streams and avenues to make that organization profitable, and they can then come to the table with those ideas. So again, back to those metrics, when somebody feels they're bringing their true authentic self, companies are statistically proven to be 25% more profitable because they get more output from their employees because they believe the company is invested in them and they're invested in the company. And that's where you're going to have that needle moving. So people need to stop looking at D&I as a demographic metric checkbox, and more of the inclusivity of it is, does this diverse group have a seat at the table, and do they have a sphere of influence to make a change?
So as meeting professionals, what can we be doing specifically for our meetings to make sure that we are being inclusive?
That's an excellent question. There are many different components of it. A lot of people will focus on the meeting itself, meaning, do we have a diverse audience? Are we taking care of things as far as balance in gender, people of color, people of certain religious backgrounds? Again, that's that psychological safety. But does your program or meeting have a format developed to where you are getting that true authentic self, meaning that diverse thoughts are not only welcomed, but they're sought after and encouraged to be shared? Do you have a platform that allows them to do that, whether it's anonymously, whether it's in a team dynamic, or whether it's specifically going out and asking them those tough questions?
So more diversity of thought, less demographics.
Correct, because once you have that inclusivity where that diversity of thought is coming into play, that's where innovation is sparked, and that's really going to be the driving agent for whether an association is successful or a corporation is profitable or whether membership is going to grow.
So while diversity of thought is really the importance, is there still a place for the demographics? Like, I know that sometimes they talk about the idea of, well, if you're not seeing it, for example, as speakers, right? If you're not seeing you represented up on that stage, you feel unwelcome. So there's still room for the demographics.
There's definitely room for the demographics, and the demographics should be your foundation part of it, because once you've laid those metrics in there that you're going to have this diversity of people of color, sex, gender, then you actually have your platform and you build the inclusivity on top of that. So the demographic part of it does have a vital part of it, and sometimes that's the easier one to be able to put those metrics in play legally, much like I mentioned with the state of California, and then the rest is going to bubble to the top.
I like that. I like that. That's the foundation. Like that's the minimum.
That's the minimum.
That's the minimum.
And that is what all organizations are currently doing, and the
Right.
inclusivity part is the tough part. Some companies do it really well. Nike is an example of a company that has that just woven through everything that they do. And others have some growing steps to do. And hopefully everybody views themselves as an element of change and a sphere of influence and are able to take that stand and move that needle forward.
So in our last minute, tell us a bit about, I know you're involved in a lot of organizations. So tell us who you're involved with and kind of what projects you're currently working on.
Sure. Well, I'm currently proud to serve on the International Board of Directors for Meeting Professionals International and leading the efforts on diversity and inclusion. And that's where some of those metrics you mentioned are coming into play, making sure that foundation is strong for them so that we can get all that inclusivity through the events, through the speakers, through everything that they do. I'm also involved at universities. I like to be able to go and speak to the students that are graduating from the hotel and hospitality management program because they are the future.
Right.
I love to tease them that they may someday be my boss, so it's important for me to be here. But I want them to feel that element of change, that they can be the one to move the needle. So that's another aspect that I'm near and dear and proud to be part of, and just recently was appointed to serve on the advisory board for my alma mater, California State University, Fullerton in Southern California. But I like to be involved in anything that touches that. So Society of Incentive Travel Executives, MPI, PCMA, all of them are important. And I believe that if you're out there spreading that message and getting more people to understand that it may be like nailing Jello to a wall, but it has to start somewhere.
Right.
And once you get that first one tacked onto the wall, then you have your roadmap to success.
And also LGBT Meeting Professionals Association.
LGBT Meeting Professionals Association. I'm on the advisory board for that as well.
Yeah.
And that is one of those kind of special interest groups that has risen because of a need for that. You have that one. You have Black Coalition of Meeting Planners. The important thing is if the mothership associations, whether it's SITE or MPI, understand that a need isn't being met and that this is going to help bridge that gap, then it helps bring everyone into the fold and make sure that everybody is feeling welcome and included.
Well, this was eye-opening because I think a lot of people, they know what it is, but they don't. So I love the stuff that you were saying about the inclusivity because I think really we've all got the diversity. We think we have that, but it's the inclusivity. If someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to contact you?
They can email me. My work email is john@surfcityusa.com for Visit Huntington Beach, so that makes that pretty easy. They can also reach out to me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, all the social media channels. I'm not as much of the expert that Alex is. He is my mentor for that area, but you can also reach out to Alex and he can make sure that connects to me as well in that area. And so I'm always happy to help.
All of that down below. Thanks so much, John. This was great. And we'll be right back with our next guest.
Thank you for having me.